In a world filled with conflict, in a universe comprised of differences, there's one thing that absolutely everything shares in common. We all exist. Including two guys named Jack and Michael, who like to chat about that very thing over a good cup of coffee. Let's pay them a visit, shall we?
Existence Brewing.
That's wild and wacky stuff. Wild and wacky. Hey.
Tonight here at the Existence Brewing.
Yes.
We have a couple of very special guys. I am dead, by the way.
Is he though?
And Michael Elliott, hosts of, what is this called? A podcast? Never heard of it. Apparently there's something to do with cacao. Ed McMahon's birthday today, too, by the way. So
yes.
Here's a... yes! There you go.
That was a zinger.
They don't do sidekicks in late-night television any longer, do they? It's not a thing.
I don't think so. I don't even think they do nighttime television anymore, quite frankly. I think it's just a big, reel on YouTube. It's a fake existence anymore.
I always like to look back at the first 4 years of late night with David Letterman and realize that in the meetings that they would have before the show, the production staff meetings, all they did was look at Paul and go, okay, Paul, now all you do is just nod your head and repeat everything Dave says. Because that's literally his presence on the show for the first 4 years. He's just like, Paul, over here, right here. And then this Band-Aid I have is not sticking well. It's just like, Band-Aids. Yeah, what are you going to do? Band-Aids. I mean, that's it.
Yeah,
that's
it's very...
for the first 4 years. So,
and what a good existence that guy had too, by the way.
Paul Schaefer?
Yeah, I mean, just hanging out, doing his thing, playing the music. I mean, that was a great gig.
That was a great show. I mean, I'm a David Letterman fan. I know he was an asshole. He really was. I look back and there's a few interviews that I take exception to. He lightened up over the years, but I have watched some reruns of that show from the 80s when he was downright cruel to some people that seemed to be exceedingly nice. I felt it was very misguided at times. His animus toward people in general. I'm as misanthropic as anybody, but the one that really sticks out of all of the guys that he interviewed that I ever saw was Mel Blanc. He had Mel Blanc on the show, the guy that did all the Looney Tunes voices. And Mel Blanc is sitting there, and I don't know what kind of a guy Mel Blanc was back in his day when he was a young man. I'm sure he sported quite the ego, the Bugatti-sized ego, because he's getting rich, making silly voices, this kind of stuff for a living. And the Warner Brothers cartoons are amazing. Everybody wants him to do the voices, but he's sitting there. He's a plump, rotund old man. He looks like a big rotting grapefruit. And he's got one of those horrible 80s sweatshirts that's completely embroidered with all the Looney Tunes characters on it. And because it's embroidered, it's all tight on him. But he looks like someone you'd see in an old folks home. It's like the first guy you'll see playing checkers with his walker sitting there in the old folks home. And he's just, life is passing him by and he's led a good life and he's happy and jolly. And Dave is just wasting on him. I mean, just being really just snide with him. And I really took exception to that after the fact, years after. I didn't watch it, live happen, unfold. I used to watch his show back in the 80s when it was early, but anyway, but I still am a Letterman fan, but I just liked the whole premise of the show. I could have done without all the celebrity interviews, I suppose, but back then celebrities, as we know, actually did something, in my opinion, so they were worth talking to. They merited a segment of your program, perhaps at times, but he had some great bits. I mean, some of the things were just, I remember when they would just call people cold and just talk to them. That was the whole thing. And he called some guy in Georgia. And, of course, they tape the show in the middle of the day. Probably it's not really late night. A lot of people. Oh, it's live.
It's pre-recorded.
No, it's pre-recorded, so you have to. But they called some guy. I don't know where they found his number. I think they just took it out of the book, and he was totally chill. He was just like, "Oh, hey, Dave," and everybody cracked up. Like, "Hi, yeah. So what are you doing right now, Arthur?" And he's just like, "Oh, I'm just making some eggs and having a beer." And everybody cracks up. It's like, making some eggs and having a beer. That's a great combo, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Eggs and beer. Love it, Paul.
Yeah.
Always
Love the beer.
Always love eggs and beer, Dave.
Eggs and beer.
So yeah, it's just. I don't know what worked about it, but something about it worked. But then it got too big. And
this was the interview that I thought you were going to refer to. This one right here.
Whenever I see these lists of like the greatest guests that ever did the David Letterman show, they point to this Joaquin Phoenix. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. But again, I could imagine at the time you saying to yourself, this kid's coming on. I think he's playing a character. I don't know. Unless he arranged it with you ahead of time. I don't know. Did he?
I knew what he was doing ahead of time, yeah.
Did you enjoy what he was doing, or were you saying, oh, Jesus?
Oh, no, I did enjoy it because it was, like getting your work in on the heavy bag.
Right.
It was easy. It was batting practice.
You look different than I remember. You've got a nice beard going, and
oh yeah, thank you.
How is that, the beard?
In what way?
Well, is it comfortable? Is it itchy? Is it? Are you pleased with it?
I'm okay with it, but now you're making me feel weird about it.
I'm sorry, I'm making you feel weird about it?
Is there something wrong?
I can't be the first one to make you feel weird about it.
Yeah, he's literally always right there with about the most caustic thing he could say that's under the table. But.
Well, and of course, the first part of the clip was him on the Howard Stern show talking about it. But, Joaquin Phoenix is wearing the dark sunglasses. And at some point, I think Joaquin just gets up and leaves.
Yeah.
And
I didn't see that, but I know of it. My girlfriend's a huge Joaquin Phoenix fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for what it's worth. So that's everything I know about Joaquin Phoenix is pretty much from her.
In what way?
Okay, Dave. Don't you think,
she's a fan in what way? In what way?
That's when Paul should have jumped in my opinion.
What was that?
I can't be the first one to make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, that's true, man. It can't be the first one. Like that. He should have piled it on. You know what I mean? Like that. Those are the moments when Paul should have rifled in.
Yeah. Now we go to Paul for the color commentary.
Speaking of interviews, you sent me something earlier today that was seemingly as tragic as it gets. It was real, and I didn't doubt it because you sent it to me, and I know you wouldn't punk me.
And I never would punk you ever.
No, but it perplexed you, and it seems to be something that is highly counterintuitive.
That's right.
You might say diametrically opposed in every way, shape, and form, universally, and like spiritually and dimensionally, and just
and serendipitous. Considering our last episode.
Yes, completely incongruous and totally serendipitous. Stephen Greer interviewed by Khloe Kardashian. Yeah, we need a bigger crash for that.
All right, hold tight.
That's a tiny chunk of the Chicxulub asteroid that this one is. Yeah,
it only goes so high though.
Get a bigger asteroid there. Come on, Michael. Get a bigger asteroid. You got to have a bigger asteroid. So I have an answer as to why this occurred, if you're curious.
Yeah.
We didn't have a chance to discuss it. I was working, you were working, and you just sent it to me on the fly.
I wouldn't think that Stephen Greer and Khloe Kardashian would really have a whole lot in common.
Trust me, they don't.
Okay, so that's why I was surprised to see Stephen Greer. I mean, he makes the rounds, clearly. He makes the rounds.
In a less serious manner, Khloe is clearly the mutant child of at least one reptilian life form that is living an existence on this planet. So they do have that in common. The Kardashians, they're not... It's not real. It's like a legion of plastic things. And I don't know what their offspring... The offspring are probably made in like the same factory where they press vinyl records. They just send them through the thing, and there's a couple of grunts, and the birthing actually.
There's like a pod involved.
Yeah, exactly. There's some pod, and the factory workers leave, and then it like peels open at night, like one of the things that produces a face hugger from the Alien movies, and then it leaps onto the conveyor belt, and away we go with this neoprene quasi life form that comes out the other side. And it's like, oh, look, honey, it's a Kardashian. It's like, yeah, just what we were hoping for. So here's the thing with that interview. I really wish that I could remember who it was. I almost want to say Dua Lipa, and it's weird that I would even know who that is. So when we worked together, I played the music of this female artist on the station that we worked at together. And it's modern, so I really don't know it, and I don't remember. Somebody became a serious devotee of Stephen Greer.
It was Dua Lipa.
Was it Dua Lipa?
Yeah.
Okay, I remembered it correctly. So she got turned on to his stuff, and then Stephen's big idea was, well, let's get a concert where everybody does the ET contact protocols. And she had apparently been playing around with them and really liked his shtick and really, like me, was impressed with the whole bailiwick that he ships around. So Stephen really got on board with this idea because he felt like this was a great way to reach the young people. And I saw an interview with him after this had come out, and that's exactly what he said, is we're trying to reach a younger audience. The audience that I've largely been reaching is an older demographic. They've been raised with me and other baby boomers who are starting to die off, quite honestly, like Jim Mars and Stanton Friedman and, these guys who maybe had a little different shtick in the ET researching world, but still were nonetheless lumped together. You'd find him at all the conventions. Stephen stayed largely away from them because he had his own thing going. But that's where this formula comes from for saying yes, for checking the yes box to Khloe Kardashian wants to interview you on her podcast. If you're Stephen Greer, is people, and he no doubt is saying this is a great way to reach a younger demographic with information that's vital.
He's got to broaden the base, as they would say.
It's kind of like me. I've taken a thunder stick to the crotch of Joe Rogan, many times here on the podcast.
Did you just say crotch?
Did you just say Rogan?
Did you just say thunder? Thunder Rogan?
My doctor prescribed that to me years ago. It was expensive and it didn't work. God damn it. I'm sorry he's tired of hearing that joke by now anyway. He needs it from all the ultimate fighting. That's why he lost his hair, actually. It was scraped off in all the ultimate fake fights that he's been doing. Anyway, I'm just saying, if Joe were to ever give me a jingle and say, hey, Jack, I know that you're not a fan, but we'd love to get you on the pod, I would say I would consider it. I'm not going to say just no outright. My first instinct is to say, go to hell, you fucking shill, you corporate puppet, you. But my other instinct is to say, well, I will consider it only because if you're going to actually allow me to promulgate what it is that I truly feel needs to be given to the world per this higher source that I feel like is driving me like Vivaldi or some damn thing, and you're not going to edit it down and you're not going to water it down and you're not going to let your corporate handlers fuck with it, then yes, but I'm going to need that in writing before I even consider it. And we know that's not going to happen. So touche, have fun with your millions of dollars and your little podcast. The armadillo's knocking, but I don't blame Stephen for doing this. He's trying to, again, proliferate the message and get to a younger audience. So I get it, but it is still quite something when you showed me a picture of those two essentially seated together. I'm sure they were probably at a distance doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I knew it was going to rock your world, and that's why I wanted to share that with you. We did just pass a milestone for Stephen Greer's audience. For those who maybe don't follow Stephen Greer, there was a CE5 day that I don't know how he decided that was going to be the day. I don't know if it kind of aligns somewhat with the cosmic forces or whatever, but it was last Saturday. And I remember actually telling my brother-in-law that we should get together and do it. But, I think I hadn't really heard any updates from him. I expected maybe some kind of a podcast from him kind of after the fact. And I think, if anything, what he's really trying to do is he's trying to get people familiar with his CE5 process and his app. And he has a very... I have the app. It's a very interesting program, and a lot of it has to do with meditation, and it's just, it's fascinating to me, as you know, we've talked about it off the air quite a bit. And so I think he's really also trying to kind of maybe push some of the program and maybe try to get more people involved in it, trying it out and just kind of getting introduced to what it is that he's all about, of course, being cosmic, would you say unity and peace
Sure.
in the cosmos?
Yeah, there's so many great messages that are wrapped up in his work. And I think, going down a separate track, as a light worker, he's very familiar with what his role is to be here. And this sort of plays into something that it's a deep subject, but it's coming up. And so I guess it's the initial tinglings for today's little sit down. Maybe we'll get into something else later, but I have seemingly been doing, I'm starting to wonder, I know I've referenced those dreams that I was having where I felt like I was astral projecting repeatedly, where I was leaping not only out of my body, but I was leaping into alter realities or different, realms that are similar to this or essentially the same, but are playing out slightly different. And so I'm visiting different versions of me, different versions of people that I know, different, parts of the same area of the same planet that I know. But again, dimensionally, they are askew because they're not the same existence factor as this one. They're not the same dimension, essentially, as we put it. I know that's very Twilight Zone, but the theory is starting to really catch on, even scientifically. So I almost felt like, well, that's kind of been training in some ways for what it seems like I've been going through more and more lately, which is this ability to, now, again, not willfully, but involuntarily detach from Jack Hansen. And I don't mean in a bodily way as this was proceeding. I mean, there's this sudden, I don't know whether to call it ability or not, because that makes it sound so superhero, but there's this sudden remembrance by my being, by my existence, that I am not, in fact, Jack Hansen. This is a persona that has been handed to me to play out in this lifetime. This persona is, like all things that exist within this experience, a gift and a great one. And I am to love and cherish this Jack Hansen guy as much as I can. And I dig this Jack Hansen person. But again, as now I speak in third person, you can tell there's this real innate sense that, okay, I am moving, not just my body. We always talk about your body as this vehicle driven by the soul. And that's a very easy concept for us to understand because, just like all of the auto metaphors that we make, it's exactly the same. I tell the car to go forward, it goes forward. I reach for a bunch of grapes. I reach for a bunch of grapes and pick them up. My body's a machine. We can all easily relate to the fact that Michael Elliott drives this machine called his human body. Jack Hansen does the same thing. Anybody in your life does. But this is take the same thing, remove the body. The personality is being driven by, I don't know. See, that's the big question mark. I don't know what's on the other side of this. The thing that's on the other side of this seems to just be what I would call, like the big U or the big E, existence itself. There's no real identity to this driving force, but there's an innate understanding, seemingly, that this personality is driven by something behind the scenes, that, yes, I am, in fact, puppeteered by something that is, I don't know if you can say greater. We always want to say greater. And I don't know that it's about greater or smaller because that implies better. And it's not. It's just the way the onion is layered. And that's been freaking me out a little bit, to be honest with you. That's a new experience because we're so readily attached to our personalities. Some people, narcissists adore them. Some people who don't like themselves, unfortunately, they try to get away from them all the time, but they find them inescapable. And so no matter whether we're at one end of the spectrum with being in love with our personality, we're narcissists and we can't put the mirror down and we think we do all these wonderful things and we sound great, and all the way to the other side of the spectrum, we're as self-loathing as it gets, leaving Las Vegas or otherwise. We can't escape and don't really comprehend the ability to escape these personalities. But not only can we do it, it's not even, in essence, real. It's to some degree play acting. It's it's artificial to a degree.
A simulation.
And I know that implies that people's actions or personas or words are therefore disingenuous. And that's not what I'm trying to say, because the motives behind them may be very true. But the personas are just like cars. They're like, think of them as hunks of metal with badging on them, and some have fancy interior and some are painted wild colors. And yeah, there's all kinds, but they do the same exact thing in basic function. They go from point A to point B, and then they rust out and they're done. And that's exactly what not only our bodies do, but our personalities do, although our personalities might linger longer in a memorial sense, if that makes sense. But this has been happening to me lately, and I think what it goes to, and what you talked about with Stephen that made me think of this, is a light worker's responsibility is to recognize the personality that he or she has been given and work with that, and not try to rebel against it or fight against it. I very often, I'm a very peace-loving person, and yet I can go on the nastiest, most horrific graphic diatribe about turning Kim Kardashian into a piñata that spews black blood and I'm beating on. But that's my responsibility. That's part of the character that I've been given to try and deliver a point. And I can't escape that, because those thoughts really do run through my mind. And so rather than try to become this Zen creature that sits and meditates constantly and says nothing but peaceful things, I don't think that's entirely my responsibility. And provided I don't cross the line to actually hurting anyone, I think we're okay. And I know that words can sting just the same. There's that person out there saying, yeah, but sticks and stones. Well, true, but if it's well directed, you got to make your point. And, maybe it's a bit of hubris coming through, but I just think that's what made me think of it, is we all have these personalities. So stop running from them. Embrace the persona you've been given. Try out different things with it. See what sticks, what fits. But basically, what you've been given, you kind of know what you got. So you got to work with that. That's the role you're playing in the play of 8 billion people that are here.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I also wanted to touch on something, and I think you're kind of referring to this sense of consciousness.
I would think to a degree, consciousness to me would be more of an abstract in this equation, because that's just the ability to be aware of any existence at all. And so I think this, in some ways, is it's under the rainbow of consciousness, let's put it that way, because now we're dealing with specific bands of color within that rainbow. Now we're talking about, hey, I'm the orange stripe, or I'm the yellow, or I'm the red, as Jack Hansen or Michael Elliott or whoever. The near-death experiencers very often will say this when they go to the other side, or wherever this place is that we kind of try to put into words that's ineffable. They will talk about detaching from this idea of self. And they will say, one of my favorite NDE experiencers was the firefighter in California who there was an endemic of a very virulent flu that was going through his area. And he had to work, and he caught this and became very gravely ill and died clinically for a short period of time, while I believe in a comatose state, and then was revived. And the experience that he told, and I don't remember his name, but let's say it was, we'll pay homage to an old Calgary Flame hockey player, Lanny McDonald. Let's say the guy's name was Lanny McDonald. When he talks about the experience, he goes and he's surrounded by the creatures. And this is the guy who talked about, many experiencers talk about those creatures, the ones they portrayed in the movie Communion that looked like the little trolls. And he said that's exactly what these things look like. They're thought to be the progenitors. Some people have said, we can get into that another time. But he talks about himself as we've known him by saying, I knew who this Lanny McDonald guy was. I was fully aware of him and what he did, and I wanted nothing to do with him. I wanted to stay right there and be with my real family and be where I really belong. And they said, nope, you're not done. You got to go back. But the way he spoke about himself, it wasn't just in third person. It was literally so detached. It was as though you're talking about someone who had robbed a bank, or, it was, I was fully aware of who this character was, but I didn't want anything to do with him. That's such a strange way to talk about oneself. Mm-hmm. And yet that's exactly, he boxed it so well. And so again, consciousness, Yes, but I think maybe more specifically, a specific persona underneath the consciousness rainbow.
Well, and I guess the reason I brought it up was Dr. Greer does a lot of things beyond just the UFO, UAP, extraterrestrial world. And I would highly recommend anybody in the audience who maybe has never heard of Dr. Stephen Greer to check out some of his work and some of the documentaries that he's been involved in, because from my perspective, he's really opened my eyes to a lot of other things and a way to look at some of the phenomenon and our place in the universe differently than I don't even remember the way I used to view it. That's how kind of far detached I have become from the old way of thinking. I think maybe it was more like, looking at extraterrestrials as the things that are going to come grab you in the middle of the night and stick a rod up your ass. But, sure. I think that, with the help of his kind of eye-opening, it has really triggered a lot of the discussions that we've had on this podcast. And it wasn't until after my near-death experience that I had that I actually started getting more interested in this topic. And I don't think that it necessarily is completely just a coincidence.
Oh, gosh, no, not at all. Not even close to being a coincidence.
No, I don't think so.
In fact, I believe, here, you can hear me shuffle my notes in here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to find the specific page, but I know at some point in all of my notes somewhere, I wrote down simple 2 words, fuck coincidence.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because there's no such thing. Coincidences just don't happen. And again, I'm not the master and maker of this realm and this matrix and how it works. I can't tell you that. Everybody wants to know the grand secret of all the gears and how they turn. I can't tell you that. I'm just one cog in the machine myself that's turning on at his own speed, trying to push whatever parts of the gear that I can. But I definitely can tell you, I mean, to me, it's come down to one of 2 things. Either, as I've said before, when people talk about, well, if it's such a grand universe and it's filled with love and da-da-da. And remember, I am a believer in what I call the neutral universe model. The universe is simply responsible for creation and propagates creatures, entities, life forms, whatever. They might be energies, which is really the best way to put it, because that's what everything is that we know. We can describe it as being energy. So it creates energies that can, in some cases, create themselves. Most of the energies created by the universe have some creative properties themselves, right? I mean, even the big rocks in space that we give no merit to whatsoever as having intelligence or whatever, they make big decisions for us, don't they? Especially when they impact us or when they're colliding and making new worlds or making new moons or affecting gravity or doing something of that nature. So everything has the ability to create in one way, shape, or form, even if it's by what we would call destructive purposes or means. So the whole point of the engine is creation, but the beings that it creates or the energies it creates, they're on their own as far as they're writing their own script is concerned, and the ways that what they do with their own creation is going to come back to bite them. And so this notion that the universe is filled with love, yes, it's teeming with love energy, but as human beings, as sentient creatures, sentient energies that are in this, we have those properties, then we have to consciously make the decision to channel this love energy. The tree, I believe, does it a little bit more involuntarily, or the animal does, the lynx or the stingray. Those animals, I think, have a consciousness just the same. I think that they have a free will just the same, but I think their governance by those powers or those different ideas are different than ours, because we have this stubborn consciousness that latches onto us and forces us really to say, I'm going to take this action or that action. And that is where the notion of good or evil is born from. That's where the yin and yang comes from. It's not an innate property of the universe. The universe, I am not a believer in 50-50 dark side, light side. That all comes from our actions and any chosen actions of any sentient energies that are within said universe. It's not a default playing field. So I think that's very important to point out as we talk about this, because again, it's a big topic. But I think, like all great teachers, Stephen has done his job, because the job or the task of any person that's called upon is to just shift the perspective. It's to just show someone a new mountaintop. You don't need to keep them there. You don't need to trap them there. Right. You certainly don't tell them that they're going to fall off and burn in some lake below if they don't do all these things you tell them to do. That's all entrapment. That's all nasty. That has no place in all this. It's simply to say, hey, how about this mountain over here? Would you like to have a look? I'll show you. That's exactly what the Space Brothers, as they used to call them, did. Because you referenced the anal probing, and none of that ever came around until Betty and Barney Hill in the early 1960s. Prior to that, all of the ET experiencer stories were about humanoid-looking people, guys hanging out on the side of the road in the Vegas desert or out in New Mexico, and they'd flag you down, and you'd think they have a flat tire, and they go, "Hi, how you doing? I'm Benny. I'm from space. You want to climb in my machine and see the Earth?" And people would take rides, and up they would go, and then they'd come back, and it'd be like, you get home and say, "Martha, you'd never believe what happened to me tonight." And of course, Martha thinks he's this filthy drunk, but so the mythology of that changed a lot with Betty and Barney Hill, and the thought process, again, if you go back and look at Stephen's material, is that was in fact those were not real creatures. Those were that experience that they had where they were abducted. The first abduction was Betty and Barney Hill, was the first time the U.S. government decided to pull it off. The first time that the dark faction said, we got to see if this works, how well we can fool people. And so there you go. And then the whole phenomenon is born.
Well, and he's done a very good job, I think, of being a steward of this topic. It always makes me question when we start to see these people that try to be kind of the ringleaders. Not that Stephen Greer has been one of the, I think Stephen Greer is kind of one of the good guys. We've talked about that in the past. But, you start to see these people come out of the woodwork of releasing books and, whatever it might be, former agents of the government, and now they're writing a book about the work that they did. I don't know. I kind of feel like there's a lot of infighting also that takes place in this world. And I kind of feel like the litmus test for me when it comes to these parties that come out and start sharing their prescription for, disclosure or whatever it might be, is exactly kind of where Stephen falls, which is more along these lines of, these things are not threats until they prove otherwise. And I think that for me, the litmus test is always when somebody comes out and says, no, this is what it is, and this is what we need to do about it. And to me, that's kind of the dead giveaway, where there's these agendas that present themselves really close to, hi, my name is X, and this is what we need to do about it.
Well, I think sadly, the agenda of most of the people who come out, if you will, whether they're experiencers, I shouldn't say whether they're experiencers, might be a little bit more true to form, whoever they are. I think if you're writing a book, immediately you become suspect in some ways, because yes, you want to share information, but at the same time, you have a publisher, they're looking to make money, you're looking to make money. So unfortunately, for as much as I would in some ways like to think that the motivations of some of these people who come out, so to speak, and present their side of this would have some, again, dark faction that's standing behind them, and it's all a part of some Satan's plan, and that whole thing. I think the Satan that's behind them is greed. I think it's just money. I think there's a thirst for writing books and, having that lifestyle where I really don't have to go pack groceries at the A&P because, I'm doing this instead. And you have to watch for that. I know it's one of the things I think Mr. Greer wants a lot of credit for, and deservedly so, which is all of the money that he's missed out on making as a result of not only, being a physician and having to call it a career to pursue this crazy thing, but also, certainly the amount of money that he could easily have cashed in off if he was more merch driven, if he was more, yes, he has books and yes, they sell. And yes, but all those movies he's done, he's made every effort to make those as free and open source as possible.
Yeah, he has.
You don't have to pay for those, and all that's letting go. And what that is that's integrity. And that is the missing element in everything. I bash capitalism all the time. Well, look, capitalism wouldn't really be a thing at all. It would be a non-factor if everybody in the world, or at least 99.9% of the people in the world, had more integrity than they do. If they had some integritous fiber to them, we would be in a lot better circumstance. It wouldn't matter, because if that much integrity was in the world, no one would have the need to feel like they need to be the king of anything, because the integrity would win out and they'd realize that an egalitarian bent is better. But
and I guess that's what I was getting at, is it almost as if, his philosophy is just that. It's not a gimmick. It's not a book. It's not a buy this seminar and you'll get rich. It really is more of a philosophy that then is kind of guided on this sense of our place in the universe. And it's bigger than just Stephen. It almost has become this kind of like mindset that it was what I was referring to, which has really kind of changed my view of our place in the universe. And, one of the people who really, really kind of just recently came into the public sphere was this Jake Barber, who was the government contractor who was a part of one of these teams that would recover these craft. And again, long time ago, we were talking about the, what does disclosure mean? Well, how do we know that we've witnessed it, or what it is that we're witnessing is disclosure? And I think that this is part of that, where, you've got this world of government contractors that has now kind of popped up on a lot of people's radar, where it's like, well, wait a minute, I didn't realize that our government was doing this. Well, your government is not doing this. These government contractors are part of this. And it then becomes this role of the government contractor to then carry out the work that the government either doesn't have time for, or because of plausible deniability doesn't want to have time for. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, we extol Stephen a lot here, and we should. He seems like a hell of a guy. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk to him one of these days. Who knows? But I think it goes parallel with the premise that there's more than just disclosure that is happening on the planet. There's an awakening, and I always kind of, I hate cliches, and sadly, awakening has become a cliche over the years. That's tied in with mysticism and the new age, as it used to be called, the stuff that everybody was supposed to run from because, Jesus was watching and it was really bad to go any other direction. But I think we've advanced our thinking to realize that all of that
Just say it, Jack. You've gone woke.
Oh my God. No. I don't think woke and awake have anything to do with each other. An awakening spiritually or cosmically would be far different than what we call woke.
We always need a good term, though, don't we?
Yeah, well, and that's language is limiting. Again, it's. I was just watching. In fact, I was going to share this with you because it's really entertaining. But my girlfriend found, of all places, Watch Mojo. Watch Mojo, the people that do the lists all the time? Like, they've done every list possible on YouTube. You're not familiar with Watch Mojo?
No. We need to look into this.
So watch Mojo, like pick a list, any list. Like, today we're counting down the top 20 movies that have chocolate in them.
It's
boom, they have it.
clickbait video, right?
It really is
Yeah.
clickbait video. But here is Watch Mojo, and she's watching some of these more clickbaity things, and here comes this video with Whitley Strieber. And Watch Mojo has done this video. They've got some young interviewer in his daylight basement who's talking to Whitley. And it's about a good 50, almost an hour long interview. And Whitley is his usual self. And there's some fantastic stuff in the interview. He gets out into the weeds as he can a little bit once in a while, but it's a fascinating watch. And, that's part of, I think, what he talks about in that. Okay,
that's scary. Yeah. I just pulled it up on the side here, and this video actually popped up on my preview list. I want to say it was like yesterday or day before yesterday, and I hadn't watched it yet.
All the more reason.
And now
why you
we're talking about it. That's what they've done, folks. They're monitoring.
It's a sign from those who are listening to us to watch it, consume the content, and watch the ads, especially, and buy all the insurance they throw at you, or whatever. No, it's a great interview, and you talk about some things that even just in that brief amount of time, conceptually, I mean, he'll bend your mind like a pretzel, talking about some of these things that he's come into contact with. And I think Whitley is another great example of a guy who, again, we go back to what I was discussing earlier. Here is a man who's going through the paces of average everyday life in so many ways. He's a writer. He's living in New York. He's doing his best to make money, get ahead in life for him, his children. He's got this place up in upstate New York. They visit, and all of a sudden, craziness, insanity seemingly starts to break out. But what does Whitley do? While his world, really, while the fake world, quite honestly, while the artificial world of construct that around him is seemingly collapsing, and this would be the world that would freak most of us out, my job, all my friends think I'm nuts, all these sorts of things. Instead, he decides to fully embrace what's happening to him, and he goes with it. And see, to me, this is a person who, for whatever reason, understands what their calling is. There's a resistance there, undoubtedly. No one wants to go through this because they do have to leave everything that is mundane to them behind. They do have to leave the sanity or normality, the Rockwellian interface that we do in this experience, that we create this artificial BS perfect life where, I'm doing all right with the 2.5 kids and the dog, and I'm making this much money, and there's this much in retirement. And he's leaving all that behind. He's pulling the ripcord on that for something that's extraordinary. And it's scarier than hell, but he's going to do it because he's seemingly been called upon. These beings, these entities are visiting him. They're not visiting you. They're not visiting me in this way. They're visiting him. Maybe they're visiting all of us. And perhaps it was just his spin of the dice that he's conscious of it, or that he got treated to this experience and therefore was chosen to be a part of it in a way that could be known so that it could be given to the rest of us in his books and with his other works. So again, lightworker, in my opinion, for sure, because this is someone that's been called upon to awaken, even if they weren't necessarily wanting to or ready to. And something else said, nope, we're grabbing you by the nuts. It's time. And instead of resisting, Whitley went with it. And you can tell that he's happy with his choice, and I don't know how he couldn't be. But imagine, what that's like, because these military guys, especially the two guys, Peniston, and then I don't remember the other fella's name, but they were the ones that were really close to the craft that landed in the Rendlesham Forest in England I think it was 1980 when this happened, or at Bentwaters Air Force Base, and this was one of the fellas who touched the craft and was imparted with, in some conscious stamping, a random series seemingly of zeros and ones, a binary code, and memorized it and later wrote it down. And it computed to the coordinates of an island that is of mythical origin that's off the coast of England, where there was supposed to be dragons and fairies and sea nymphs and things seen floating up from. And here we have this scout vehicle, as it appears to have been, from another world that's down here, sitting here in the forest, and they're out there looking at this. But of course, these guys, they were all absolutely bent over by their bosses and said, you will never talk about this, ever. This is as top secret as it gets. And what happened out there tonight will not be discussed to any large latitude at all. And so you talk about with these guys who are bailing on their top secret and super top secret and, double secret probationary clearances from Dean Wormer. This is a major thing, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're pulling the Whitley Strieber. They've been visited in some capacity, and they're being told, you got to bail on everything that you know that's sacred to you and that your foundation is built on, and go with what you know your instincts are telling you is the right thing to do. It's awakening to the right thing. That's hard. And so the men and women that do this deserve a hell of a break. It's easy for us to get on their back, but a lot of them, most of them, from what it sounds like, really get wound into these projects and have no idea what they're getting into. And until it's too late, until they've been told, look, we brought you here to drive a tractor, and now you've seen something that, either you were supposed to see and we knew it would happen, and eventually we have to, come to you and basically say, don't say anything, or you and your family are fucking dead. We're going to kill everybody that was ever important to you. And they're serious, So it's a big deal. It's not easy, and it's not designed to be easy. But I think it's just like the Plutonian theory in astrology. There's a thing, Saturn is the great teacher. Saturn is the lesson planet. And when you deal with Saturn transits, or when you deal with anything that is Saturnal and it is affecting your chart, your planets, it's aspecting them. Saturn very often will check in with you and say, how's the lesson going? And if you look back and say, not so good, Saturn says, okay, I'll come back and check again. It kind of leaves you alone to deal with the lesson. Pluto, on the other hand, destroys everything down to the ground. It's going to lay waste to everything, whether you want it to or not, because we need a clean foundation to build something new upon. And that's the only way it's going to happen. And so I remember talking to a spiritualist about this one time who really didn't know much about astrology. I seem to be a little bit more knowledgeable about that for what it's worth. But we were talking about this, and I said, so, with Pluto, it's the more you hand it over and say, okay, Pluto, you win. I capitulate. I'm giving this away. You don't have to take it because I'm giving it up. The quicker you're going to get it back tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. And so kind of interesting. It's sort of the same thing to sort of remember, I think. I don't know. Just thought of it. So.
No, and I think what this also does is it points out that there's no way we could ever do a podcast, one show that would really give this topic credence, because as you start to peel away layers of the onion, you start to get into all of these different areas that you never even dreamed of and never even thought of. And so for what it's worth, check out the Dr. Greer.
And the Whitley Strieber interview from Watch Mojo is definitely very interesting.
I'll have to check it out.
Get out and change something. And that's the other thing I would say. We are so bored right now. It's one of the reasons why there's so much consternation over so many things that really, honestly, at the end of the day, don't matter. And I know that people, just want to put one right between my eyes for saying that all these social issues that seem to be so prominent right now are really not that big of a deal. But really, what are we focusing on? Why is there so much strife, and why is there so much of a rive that's going on in our world right now over all of these things that we've essentially made up, or we've attached meaning to, that there's really no meaning to them? Fine, historically speaking, perhaps there are people that have not been treated in large numbers as well as other people. They're, known for being more impoverished, or they're not given as many opportunities. That could change immediately, but it's not going to change as easily on a social level as it will on, again, I'll go big, a cosmic level. If you begin seeing everybody for something besides the makeup of their demographics, the color of their skin, their age, their sex, their race, their religious preference, all these things that we check boxes on for government forms to get into schools or to qualify for things, if we get off of that level and realize that we're all ticking on the same miracle at the same exact pace, all of that disappears. All of that trouble and all that strife goes away. And one of the things that you have to do in a Plutonian sense, again, is to let it go. And right now, there's a lot of not letting it go that I see in the world. Right now, there's a lot of gnashing about the past. There's a lot of this happened and I'm pissed about it. And it was 1870 and it didn't happen to you. It happened to someone else. And I'm not trying to cover the tracks of anybody who's guilty of atrocities historically. But the problem that we run into is it's 150 fucking years ago. There's nothing that can be done about it now. That history has been written. The best you can do. This reminds me of when I went over to visit my brother shortly after he started having children. And he had one who was about 4 and one that was 2. And I went to visit him for the weekend, and I arrived at his place in the morning on Saturday, and he was on the front porch, and it wasn't like he had his hands in his face in his hands or anything. He wasn't that woebegone, but you could tell he was shaken. And I arrived and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Not good. I'm not in a good way." "Why? What's going on?" "Well, I've been doing some thinking." I said, "Oh, that's never good for you." So I said, "What have you been thinking about that's troubling you so much?" And he said, "Well, I just realized, man, I realized something this morning, man. We're from the old man." He's talking about our father, who was a son of a bitch. And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Yeah, but you don't understand, man. We're from our old man, okay? We're from him. Like we're beholden to him." And I'm like, "What are you driving at here? What is this all about?" He says, "I have kids now, man. You don't understand. I'm going to make the same mistakes he did with us because that's just the way that it is. The sins of the father." And he goes on this biblical rampage. And I'm just like, stop. And I just said, stop. Are you a conscious being? Are you aware of your actions? Yes. I said, are you in control of your actions? Well, yeah, I think so. No, not I think so. I am. Can you make the choice right now to go inside and beat your daughters if you want to? Well, yeah, of course I can. Well, then the cycle can be broken.
Yeah. It
can be broken just that easily. All you have to do is choose not to continue it. And what's so fascinating to me is, it was so elementary. It was so simple. It was like, how can someone not think of this? He hadn't thought of that. He really felt as though he was enslaved to this genetic line of not being good to your children. And I worry, Michael, that there's a lot of people that feel beholden to the same thing. For whatever reason, they have this intoxicated sense that I'm going to repeat all of these ills that came before that make me unhappy, when the easiest thing to do is identify what makes you unhappy and not perpetrate them on others, especially your fucking children.
Well, and I think when you were talking just a few minutes ago about, the things that have to occur in order for people to wake up and see this kind of philosophy in action and how beautiful that could be. There's a lot of bondage that we carry in this world that we don't even realize that we have, right? In our society, whether it be the way we look at other people, whether it's, the way we look at ourselves in the mirror every day, how we portray ourselves, how we describe ourselves. Hi, my name's Jack. I work at this place and I do this and I make this much money and I check this box and I check that box exactly.
Yeah. And so again, if you take the conversation that I had with my brother and broaden it out and now stretch, again, the backbone of what I told him to a societal level, and then not just to a societal level, but then to a global species level, to a, hey, we're all here sharing the planet together level, you start to erode away. You start to see some of this crap that we create fall away because we are just too invested in, some of the decay that occurs because of our individual experiences and choices. And, I don't really want to go down the 9/11 rabbit hole, but just for the sake of any and all conspiracy theories and or arguments that could be made to the contrary of the narrative that we've been given, the official narrative. Let's say the official narrative is true. Okay, if the official narrative is true, then a handful of very, I guess, misplaced gentlemen, you could say, or gentlemen who were significantly troubled, created a hell of a lot of chaos just one day, did they not? And we've seen with these mass shootings what can happen, just the same. One person can go out, and that fine thread of sanity that I talk about, that piece of floss that we all tiptoe every day to get from one side of our day to the other, if somebody even pings it, there can be 100, 200, 1,000, even 10,000 of us gone. Just, those guys, again, if we believe that, which I don't necessarily buy, but at the same time, let's just, for the sake of the story to go with, let's just say that was a handful of dudes. What was it? 4 or 5, 6, something like that. Next thing you know, just about 4,000 people gone quickly. So, the point is that we all have the ability to, the point is, I guess, historically speaking, that these wars and all of these things that happen and all this stuff that we're upset about now, they could very easily be perpetrated by only a handful of people. I mean, yes, it takes an army to fight a war, but the problem with the army is they're following the orders of 1 or 2 folks that are corrupt. Nazi Germany is probably a pretty good example of this too, I would imagine, right? I mean, you're talking about an entire society of people, most of the German people, the citizens, who, even those who were in the Nazi party because they thought it was a great political movement, it was a great idea, had no idea that the Holocaust was even occurring. None. Yeah. Why would they? It's bad for business for Hitler and the higher-ups to say, we'll let them in on this later, or maybe we'll never tell them and they'll never know because they weren't a part of these neighborhoods anyway, right? I mean, so it shows you, but what are we going to do? Because the Jewish people have such a great attitude about the Holocaust. They really do, because I've met a number of Jewish people and had the opportunity to focus on this subject with them, at least briefly, and they all say the same thing. Oh, Hitler? We forgive him. It's all right. It's fine. And you're talking about 6 million people, killed in the worst possible way as it aligns with or misaligns with their spiritual beliefs. The point is to let it go. There's no reason, if you carry on the pain, it's just going to last. So at some point, there has to be a letting go. And I feel like that's what we're just about at the precipice of now, is we're at a really big time where we're going to let a lot of our shit, a lot of what you called bondage or baggage, historical baggage and bondage, go. Individual stuff, societal stuff, get rid of it. It's gone. Because it's dragging us down now, and it's completely unusable where we're going. And so it has to go. And so my advice, I guess Pluto wins the day, because my advice would be very Plutonian. If I'm going to give any advice, which I guess I rarely do outwardly, I give concepts and things, but I would say do the Pluto. We'll call it do the Pluto. Get your do the Pluto t-shirt out, or your do the Pluto license plate frame, brandish it on your car, because what you do is you don't want to let go of it. You're not ready to let go of it, but instinctively, it's gone. Give it up. Just give it up, because it's going to go anyway. And again, by giving it up willfully, you put yourself in so much better position than if Pluto has to drag it away from you. But make no mistake, it will. One way or another, it's gone. Yeah. So give it up.
Please tell me that your brother said,
I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
And then he ran out and bought a new car.
Oh, good Lord. Something like that. But he felt better, and I felt better for having, enlightened is a strong word. It makes me sound really self-aggrandizing, but I felt better for having to have been there. It was clear why I was supposed to visit that day, was to set him right about the concept that there's nothing I can do about my father's sins. I'm going to carry them forward. It was just completely foreign to me. But then again, I forget that maybe I think slightly differently than most people. But isn't like you have children. I'm sure your father was a great guy, though. I mean, I haven't heard you speak an ill word about him, but I would just assume, Michael, that most people, even if they were beaten to a bloody pulp and, like tortured by their father or their mother for that matter, when they start having children, would just automatically by default go, okay, I'm not doing that to my kids. But apparently not. Apparently there's the thought with at least a few people out there that, nope, now I have to do the same thing to them because it's just the way it's supposed to be. And that's insane. There's no reason for that. But
I don't understand it, man. I always try to raise my children the best way I can. And I know what you mean, though.
Well, it's coming from the guy who doesn't have kids, so it never lands quite right. But to me, the most important thing to remember about any people, whether they're whether they're crawling still, whether they're a few hours old or they're 100 years old, is that they're on their own journey. And I really think that the biggest mistake, if there's a mistake, and it's not a mistake necessarily, it's just human nature by one design or another. But the biggest little gaffe that parents tend to make is they always say they want what's best for their children, but they interfere with their journey too much. They bug them about going to college when it's not part of their journey and they have to accept that, or they bug them about, doing this or not doing that. And, I think it's at some point, allowing a child to go about their way and find their way, and realizing that your job is to nurture them and to show them how to be kind and loving and, show them the best virtues that you possibly can and provide for them certainly the things they need in order to be sheltered and safe until they reach that age where they can go out and make those decisions and get those things for themselves. But that's just one guy's opinion. And like I said, it's shit meaningless because I don't have any kids. So what do I know?
I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
That one's not going to go away.
Oh, God. No, it has to. We can't have him I can't hear his voice more than once a week. Seems like I'm seeing a little less of him these days. What's going on with that?
I think they're trying to spin the narrative. They're trying to come up with new ideas on how we can really stick it to our neighbors in the north and south.
Oh, that's right. The big socialist Canadians. Oh, God, the enemies. So I have to admit, if there was a U.S.-Canadian war, I would defect and fight for Canada. Just have to say that.
What do you think that conversation was like in the Oval Office?
What conversation's that?
We're going to start referring to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. You do a better Donald Trump than I do.
I would say... I think I would say what I said when we were talking about this the last time, if I'm not mistaken, which is, sadly, 9/10 of school children and people in North America, 9/10 of Americans can't point to the fucking Gulf of Mexico. They don't know where it is. Most people can't identify their own state on a map. It's sad.
We're also going to start referring to American cheese as Swiss cheese and Swiss cheese as freedom cheese.
Freedom cheese.
See, I always kind of morph into like a George W. Bush. I can never stick with straight Trump.
You know what's really interesting about the Trump impression trope is this. The Trump trope is this. When he first got into office, no one could do him.
No
one could do a Donald impression, and it was troublesome. It was like, this is like the biggest thing we need to be worried about. Of course, everybody, that can't stand him is worried about he's the Antichrist, the devil, all these things. But really the most troubling, I guess, aspect of his whole coming into office as the 45th president was no one could do him. And now all of a sudden, by the time we hit term 2, which was interrupted, of course, by 4 years of Joe, there's all kinds. Everybody's doing Trump impressions.
Oh yeah, this one's the best.
For God's sake.
This one's
I don't
the
even
best
like
right
to talk
here.
about the guy.
Like an animal from the zoo. She's so nasty. Look at it.
That one's the best. Hands
guy's
down.
That guy's pretty good. There's no question about that. But I think what's happened, honestly, with that is it's become surreal. I mean, again, there's no politics here because fuck it. I think it's all a ridiculous joke circus. And I'm not saying that about just right now. I've said that way back since, I think the last really honestly decent human being happened to be the president of the United States, and that was Jimmy Carter. Even then, it was a fucking silly, ridiculous game circus. This thing we do is crazy. And so I think that's finally why it's where it is. It's nuts. It's crazy. This thing that just happened. I do not want to talk about, like, me. I don't want to talk about this guy. I don't want to give him any more. He gets plenty of ink. He gets plenty of, but this thing that just happened with Zelensky, tell me this isn't the biggest just show that's
reality
being put
TV
on,
show.
Or this is fucking Jerry Springer. I have watched more boring videos on the news with one dignitary or world leader sitting in front of that fucking fireplace with whoever's president exchanging, we're both rich, isn't it great? Yeah, it is great, isn't it? We're smiling for the cameras now, but we're going to be drinking brandy and smoking cigars in just a few minutes. It's awesome to be better than the rest of the world, isn't it?
And they all sit there and they laugh and they joke and they're all happy.
It's suddenly, just overnight, it's Maury Povich. And I'm just going, something's wrong. Am I the only one who's seeing that something is just ghastly, like askew here? I don't care about the whole thing.
And how deep is Zelensky's voice? Mr. President, I'm not playing cards. I'm not playing cards, Mr. President.
It's like an episode of Rocky and Bullwinkle. It's just like what you're doing.
His voice does not match his face. He sounds like this. Mr. President, I'm not playing cards. And Donald.
Well, I'd like to put my hand up and say, Mr. Zelensky, you're looking at a man who owns several casinos, so he is playing cards. Just FYI.
Oh, you would have gotten thrown out of the office.
He is the trump card after all, right? So bad line for you.
There you go. You got it. And then I would have played this one.
I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
Oh my God. Geez. See, that to me is that's Satan. Like, actually, no, he's way too meek to be Satan. He's just I don't know. I don't know what that guy is. He's got way too much money and he's bored. And so now he's going to sift through all of the files in the White House. And like I told you last time, that was a quick phone call. Gravitas can be difficult sometimes, Donald, and I'm not offering you any, but how about, let's say $2 billion just to get in there. If you get in there, I get in there. What do you say? Sounds good to me. We'll have a big party. I'll have you over. By the way, I'm commandeering Swiss cheese. It's no longer Swiss cheese. It's that cheese with the holes in it.
Is that what we're supposed to refer to it as, the cheese with the holes in it?
Calling it Capone's cheese, although I'm told there is mascarpone cheese. Totally different, not the same thing. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'd love to laugh at it all. Sadly, it's impacting a lot of people's lives in a very negative way. It's only, you're only able to laugh about it for just so long before you go, fuck, this is, it's also so tragic at the same time. But there's legions of fans, and it's a good thing Jerry Springer's dead, or he'd have gone from being the mayor of Cincinnati to the president of the United States real quick, because he was the original ringmaster. I don't think he had quite enough money to run, though.
No,
God damn, it takes a lot of money to run for president now.
Well,
Jesus,
remember the only reason
an exclusive club.
The only reason he got busted was because he wrote a hooker a check.
Which, like, who does that? Like,
why would you pay a hooker with a check?
And why? Here's the other thing. What kind of a nice girl is hooking that would take a check? I mean, that's got to take a salt of the earth. That is not a seasoned prostitute who tenders a check, who's willing to take a check from anybody, even Donald J. Trump. We know he's good for it, but is he actually going to go, I'm moving the money quickly, get it out of the account. She's not getting it. It wasn't that good.
It was hush money.
I've gotten better head from cheese, speaking of cheese. So,
Mr. President, we're not talking about the cheese. We're not talking about the cheese, Mr. President.
Stop talking. Your face doesn't match your voice.
So gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
Oh, no. Stop. It has to stop. Because I hear him and it's like...
I'll tell you. It kind of reminds me of Nicolas Cage. Yeah.
It's like the voices that you would hear when you used to spin records backwards in the 80s. And
oh, yeah, it does, doesn't it? But
he talks like he's backmasked.
Doesn't it sound like Nicolas Cage?
I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
Maybe it is Nicolas Cage, and it's just another big larf on all of us.
Man, you get the star for the bumper music again this time.
Oh, sweet. This is one of my favorite songs from a British band called Charlie. It's Heading for Home, aren't we all?
Well, as we head for home, remember to tip our waitress.
Not completely over, though.
No. Well, until we meet again, Jack.
Sounds good. Love you.
Well, it looks like Jack and Michael have finished up their latest chat about all things existence. But if anything they said got your own Existence Brewing, be sure and catch their other talks at existencebrewing.com and drop them an email to share your thoughts using contact@existencebrewing.com.
Existence Brewing.